Good morning. Thank you all for joining us today. To kick us off, I'd like to call up Commissioner Glassman.
Here. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for being here on an early morning, and I especially want to thank this very esteemed panel. For those of you, how many of you were here Monday when we kicked this off? Okay, great. This is so vital, and not just to my district, District 2, but really to the entire city. But this is a topic that I find very relevant to our future. It's why I'm so pleased to have been involved with this, and I want to thank Public Works Department for really putting this together. We have an amazing team in Public Works. I want to thank you folks for coming. I know it was hard to suffer through the weather that we've had the last few days for you coming from around the country, but I hope that you were able to manage. This is a lot of work in a short period of time, so please appreciate how much effort has gone in. We met on Monday. I especially want to thank not just the panel and our Public Works Department, but I really want to thank you and all of the stakeholders. This was a stakeholder-driven exercise. This was something that was done not just with the input that we heard on Monday when we met at the Museum Discovery and Science, but this is also driven with interviews with folks. Those of you that participated, I want to say thank you very much. That is really what is helping us guide the discussion. I know that you, as well as I, am very much looking forward to what we're going to hear today. And again, I just wanted to say thank you very much for all of your work on this. It is greatly, greatly appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Glassman. Well, again, good morning, and thank you for joining us. I'm Lauren Callahan, the Senior Director of Advisory Services for the Urban Land Institute. We are here today to present the recommendations on building a resilient Fort Lauderdale, developing criteria for road elevation, a ULI Advisory Services panel. The Urban Land Institute is a member-based nonprofit organization of more than 40,000 multidisciplinary real estate and land use experts from around the world. Our mission is to shape the future of the built environment for transformative impact in communities worldwide. One way that we fulfill this mission is through the Advisory Services Program. For 75 years, ULI has paired our multidisciplinary member experts with communities to tackle the most pressing challenges in land use and real estate. ULI's Advisory Services panels cover a wide range of topics from infrastructure to economic development and housing. In partnership with 2,000 members over 75 years, we've addressed land use and real estate issues in more than 700 communities, recommended improvements to more than 400 downtown areas, had transformative impact in more than 21 countries, and helped improve more than 100,000 acres of parkland. Locally, in Southeast Florida, we've convened over 40 national and local advisory services engagements. One of the hallmarks of our program is that we provide independent, unbiased recommendations. This is because advisory services panels, like this group of experts that you see here, are from outside of Fort Lauderdale or of the community, and they're volunteering their time to tackle a challenge in 3 to 5 days. So for us, we utilized a robust process over 4 days that we've developed over 75 years, and there are 3 main parts of this process. We start by listening and learning, and as the commissioner noted, we met with the sponsor team, the City of Fort Lauderdale, to learn more about the challenge. We did a site tour, but then we also conducted a listening session on Monday night to hear more from the community. And we conducted more than 40 stakeholder interviews with a wide range of stakeholders throughout Fort Lauderdale. Then we spent a little bit of time developing our recommendations. It was fast and furious, but at the end of that period, we developed a set of recommendations that to tackle this challenge, and you're going to get to see the results of that here. So ultimately, we're here to present those recommendations, and in a few months, there'll be a final report that we'll submit to the city. So now I'd like to turn it over to Lindsay to talk about ULI's focus on resilience.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us here. I'm Lindsay Bruger. I'm Vice President of ULI's Urban Resilience Program. I'm based in Washington, D.C. at our global headquarters. And the Urban Resilience Program is really critical to the question of flood resilience that we were facing here in Fort Lauderdale. The Urban Resilience Program at ULI helps buildings, cities, and communities be better prepared for the impacts of extreme weather, like flooding. We not only help to reduce those vulnerabilities, but we also seek to harness the social, economic, and environmental co-benefits that can help our communities thrive and be strong in the long term. We do that work through research, through convenings, and through technical assistance like what we've done this week. And we do that, as my colleague mentioned, in collaboration with our many global members and experts like who you see here. We have over 45,000 members across the globe, many of whom are deeply committed to resilience and experts that are eager to share their guidance with communities worldwide. And just to give you a quick image on this map here, in just this country, we have worked from Alaska to Puerto Rico on topics of a wide range of resilience needs, and we're really grateful that you called us here to help you because we see a lot of promise in Fort Lauderdale, and we're really looking forward to sharing our recommendations with you and seeing you take up these calls to action and strengthen Fort Lauderdale. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our panel chair, Jim Hyde.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good morning to everybody. It's great to be here. Thank you again for the great weather, Commissioner Glassman, although we didn't get much of a chance to experience it because we were pretty heads down for a couple of days. I'm honored to have had the opportunity to chair this panel. I come to you from California, trained as a landscape architect, and have done about 16 of these panels. So this is one of the best panels I've ever had the chance to work with. And I think you'll see that these are people who represent a broad perspective from across the country and, really take this assignment, even though it's voluntary, very, very seriously. The success of these panels really relies on the advanced work of our sponsors. They help shape the problem statement, provide us with in-depth briefing materials that really give us the ability to work quickly, and provide tours and are available to answer questions very quickly. And so I want to give a quick shout out to the team at the Public Works Department that really did an amazing job. As I said, I've done 16 of these. It was probably one of the best briefing books I've ever seen, one of the most succinct and in-depth 4 hours spent understanding the problem. So thank you, staff and team, for that. As was mentioned, the other really unique part of this program is the immersive process we undertake, and there are over 50 of you that we interviewed, and it's that cross-section of explanation of perspectives and issues and experiences that you shared with us that really allows us to hit the ground running. So this process starts with an understanding or a question that's given to us, and we were given a focus on a single topic with multiple dimensions. The topic really was about raising roads in areas experiencing risk, flood and increased flood risk. And the questions were basically summarized in 4 key parts. We were asked to assess the impact of sea level rise on roadways. We were asked to look at recommending priorities for how the city could go about defining which roads to actually elevate. We were asked to guide how to balance where investments would go because the road cost is fairly high. How do you do that and balance that with the needs of other districts? And finally, how to address this issue of roadway harmonization, connecting elevated roads to existing properties, and how do you fund that? A project of this complexity can't be done with a single discipline, and I'm delighted, as I mentioned, to have had the opportunity to work with such an esteemed group of my colleagues here to my left. And we're going to let each of them introduce themselves in the interest of time as we go through, but I think you'll see that we have a broad variety of disciplines. This is not only an engineering, economic, planning, architecture, design problem. We have people representing all of those disciplines, and it's that kind of cross-disciplinary perspective that both makes these recommendations, I think, fairly robust, but also what makes these kind of challenging problems, it's the only way to address them. So as we got into the process, we started with a site tour and then a briefing from the staff. And as we started to get gathered together to deliberate what we were really going to look at, our initial question was, really, what is the problem? Is the flooding a risk or a nuisance? Is the problem bigger than the specific area we were asked to look at? So we quickly recognized that if we focused our efforts only on the area we were asked to look at, the recommendations could be of very limited value. So as we deliberated our task, we set about to look at how we could help the homes in the study area that had been assigned, how we could better use that information to equip the city to address the larger issues of resilience within its boundaries, and then what we came up with, how that would fit into or nest into the larger solutions and conversations that are going on across the county. In formulating these opportunities, we took a look at both the challenges and opportunities to ensure that we were being objectives. And we started with some of the initial challenges that kind of bubbled up to the top. The first was that just elevating the roads would not create an enduring solution for resilience. Many people said it's the solution of last resort, not where you start. The second was the true cost of elevating the roads is compounded. It's not just elevating the roads, but there's a series of deferred maintenance, long-term infrastructure that needs to be upgraded that really creates kind of a paralysis by sticker shock. So the need to underground utilities and take advantage of some of these opportunities that we'll talk about really increases the price tag and makes this a very daunting undertaking. The third thing was this limited transparency to new buyers about the increasing liability that could be cast across multiple parties because the nuisance and or risk of where people are buying is not being clearly communicated. While the price and demand for homes in the affected areas remains extraordinarily high, there's really no clear responsibility or tool for potential buyers to understand what they're buying into. And then building on that, without a long-term solution to some of these issues in resilience, the real estate market could be at the risk of a powerful reset. At some point or some event, a major hurricane, powerful king tide, flooding of numerous homes, or the inability of emergency vehicle to get access to a home via a street that's underwater could take a lot of this valuable real estate and reset its price. This could have a cascading effect on the overall market and undermine the ability to take action quickly. But amidst these challenges, we found a number of opportunities to create momentum and early success. We saw a range of powerful assets that you have available as you embark on this process. And the first is a really impressive culture of regional collaboration around these topics between the Climate Compact, plans that are underway in your community and other communities, ongoing efforts that are really creating some pilot projects and understanding there's a substantial body of evidence and work that's impressive and available to build on as you move forward as Fort Lauderdale. The second thing that was very impressive, and this came out of our interviews, was that the community acknowledges the change is real. There wasn't a lot of debate that the sea is rising and the waters are coming. It was really a question about what are we going to do about it. The third thing was people were asking for a holistic solution. They recognize that roadways is part of a solution, but they want to know what the larger toolbox is that is going to fit into. The other thing was that we heard that a lot of the people who are the most affected actually recognize that they need to be part of the solution. They're not just saying the government's got to fix it and pay for it all. They recognize that this is an existential issue that many of us have to play a role in, and they want to know how they can help. The fifth one is properly harnessed. I mean, this kind of what we saw as kind of a counterintuitive real estate market actually provides a powerful catalyst to help fund and maybe move forward with some of the solutions in a much more quick manner than you might find in other communities. And finally, the funding tools and mechanisms for these kinds of subjects are increasing every day. State, federal, local funds are becoming available for those communities that have established a clear strategy around resilience as an overarching idea and action plan for their community. So, given that the opportunities outweighed the challenges, I'm going to let my colleagues now move on to the recommendations. But we have a lot of information to share. So in order for you to be able to follow along, we've organized this into 4 key parts. Part 1 is before you start. So what should you be doing before you elevate a road? The second is the road of choice. How do you decide which roads to elevate when you actually decide that's needed? The third part is funding the solutions. What mechanisms exist to help you fund these undertakings? And finally, getting it done. What programs, roles, and responsibilities are needed to implement. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Hannah Glosser to talk about how we start.
Good morning. I'm Hannah Glosser. I'm based in New York City, and I'm with HR&A Advisors. We're a policy planning and real estate and economic development firm. My background is in climate adaptation and get to do a lot of work on flood risk reduction planning, policy, and program design across the country. So thrilled to be here and appreciate you all welcoming us to Fort Lauderdale. So as Jim mentioned, there's a handful of challenges that are facing the city today as it relates to flood risk. And I think the first really important piece here is for the city to take a comprehensive and long-term approach to adaptation. So we know that there's storm surge, sea level rise, the risk of extreme rain events that accumulate over time. And these are compounding risks. And so it's important to not think about these in isolation, but how they interact with one another. In addition, as you all know, many of you in this room, something that happens to your property will likely impact your neighbor. You cannot think about these, both the risks, but also the solutions in isolation, and they require a system-wide purview. It's also important to address the near-term need, tomorrow's need, today's need, but also think towards the long term. And as we talk about these different risks and these different needs, it really requires different types of solutions. And one solution may be applicable to one neighborhood, but a different solution will be applicable to another one. And so that's really underscores the need for this long-term and comprehensive approach. The clicker's moving. So as part of this, kind of our first recommendation is to really establish resilience as the priority for the city. Not a priority, but the priority. And this will support facilitating connections amongst the numerous efforts underway, both within the city, but then also the greater Fort Lauderdale, so within the county as well. We know that the county is currently undertaking a risk assessment and resiliency plan effort, and this can be a guiding framework to position some of the more specific plans, programs, or policies, and really connect them with one another. Again, creating this more comprehensive approach will also support the city to improve coordination amongst city staff, but also amongst county efforts. I think it will help improve communication to stakeholders, and it will provide some clarity about, what is the priority, what is government doing, what residents should be doing, and how can everyone work together. So Jim talked about the need here, and as you all know, it's great. So really, the question the city has posed to us is, how do they balance the need across the city? And I think first, and this is for our overarching framework, but you'll see this reflected in the criteria for roadways as well, the city should prioritize protecting people and protecting those with the greatest risk. And so as part of that, we know, as Jim talked about deferred maintenance, there has been an uneven distribution of historic public infrastructure investment across the city. And this does need to be at the forefront of decision making as you think about the allocation of resources. For example, and as many of you know intimately, inland areas are at risk to surface flooding from rain events and are already experiencing these impacts. So with the April 2023 flooding event, homes, for example, in the Edgewood neighborhood, over 270 homes experienced major damages. So again, thinking about protecting people, where is there the greatest risk, it's important to think about this in the landscape of how best to deploy city resources. I'm still me. And as part of this, thinking a little more specifically about how best to deploy city resources, really any project, you need to think about benefits and costs, and do the benefits outweigh the costs? And so when we think about this for any type of project, when we're talking about costs, that includes both the upfront infrastructure investment and then ongoing maintenance. And for benefits, we look towards kind of three categories: economic, fiscal, and social. So on the economic side, that could include human impacts, avoided displacement, avoided physical damages, and losses to critical assets. For fiscal, we're looking at avoided tax loss. So that could be property tax loss, business sales tax loss, and corporate tax loss. And then on the social side, this includes both environmental, community, equity, health, and recreational benefits. And it's really important to think about all three of these categories as we think about benefits that a project could bear.
Good morning, everybody, and thanks for being here to listen to us and talk to us today. This is an exciting topic. We really appreciate this opportunity. My name is Chris DeWitt. I am a city planner with VHB. We are a planning, design, and engineering consulting firm, and I happen to be based in Williamsburg, Virginia. One of the things that hopefully you've heard in the presentation so far and will continue to hear throughout our presentation is what we see as a need for a comprehensive system-wide approach. We think roadway elevation is an important component of your resilience, your flood resilience toolkit, but it's just one component and needs to work in conjunction with other items. And in fact, we think that other things ought to be invested in first and or in conjunction with potentially elevating roadways. Elevating roads is expensive. It has the potential to push water into unintended locations. There are ways to design around that and design for that. And when we get to the section of our presentation dealing with the road elevation criteria, we'll talk about some of that. But it is an important consideration. And again, we think some of these other tools should be used and invested in first. This is consistent with the city's ongoing efforts and successes that the city is having in terms of installing tidal valves, elevating the city's seawalls, and working on stormwater infrastructure. We're emphasizing that those things ought to continue, they ought to be enhanced, and they ought to be coupled with other items in the toolbox that we will suggest. I'm going to see if that slide advances because I hit the thing. We'll give it another try. So again, to go along with the current efforts that the city is undertaking, the potential to elevate roadways, our report will recommend a toolbox, which is a wide array of options to promote flood resilience in Fort Lauderdale. This is just a snip of the matrix that will be included in our report. This is not an exhaustive list of the measures in the toolkit. We just wanted to let you see how the matrix is set up. So you can see we have specific solutions in the column on the left. Those could range from tide valves to roadway elevation. We talk about what type of risk each of those measures would address and relatively how well it might address the risk. And then we talk about what the relative cost is. Is it high, medium, or low level of investment? So at a very quick glance, stakeholders in the cities can look at this matrix, look at the menu of tools, think about which risks might be addressed and how much it might cost moving forward in a comprehensive way. The solutions that we have in our toolbox are organized into 4 different scales of improvements. Site and building level, something that an individual property owner could do. Street level, something that might involve multiple owners but could happen at a neighborhood street level. Neighborhood or district level, getting a little bit larger, a little bit more parties involved. And then really something at the city level, larger scale investment, longer term effort. And we'll go through each of those scales and talk about the tools that we have in each of those categories. But I did want to highlight this similar example. This is the graphic that you see here is from a resilience project in Norfolk, Virginia. And you can see they were dealing with similar threats and looking at what is the comprehensive set of tools that we can bring to the table to address these overlapping and compounding threats. So addressing storm surge, coastal defense, stormwater management, how do rainfall events interact with and compound the king tide flooding, transportation infrastructure, how are our roads and our pathways impacting flood resilience, and you can see that elevating roads is a component of that for Norfolk. And then community amenities. If we're going to be doing these large-scale public projects, is there a way to incorporate open space, multimodal transportation, and other amenities, again, to further enhance resilience? I'm going to go through each of the scales of the improvements in our toolbox, starting at the building and site level. Again, these are things that could potentially be undertaken by individual homeowners, and in many cases are being undertaken by individual homeowners. So elevating private seawalls, elevating homes and HVAC and electrical equipment, and then on-site stormwater management techniques, things like increasing pervious cover, and potentially installing things like rainwater cisterns that you see here in the images on the right, collecting rainwater from roof runoff, potentially using it as a source of irrigation. Those types of measures are in the toolbox at the building and site level. As we move up to the street level, these are things that could be implemented as a cooperative effort between multiple property owners, potentially between neighborhoods and the city. They're a little bit larger scale, not involving just one lot or one owner. And again, they build upon the success that the city is currently having with some of their ongoing programs to install tidal valves, looking at potential for stormwater pumping, and potentially looking at things like introducing subsurface storage into these street systems. Roadside swales are an important part of this. The city has an active campaign to promote, encourage, and require the installation and maintenance of roadside swales. The bottom left image there is taken from the city's website where they talk about roadside swales, and this is an example of a properly maintained swale that is clear of debris and is mowed. It just gives an opportunity for some of that water to infiltrate. Just one of the many measures that could be implemented. And then you can also see on this list, once we've exhausted some other potential solutions, we do think roadway elevation is an important part of the overall toolkit. There also might be opportunities to think in a different way about the roads and actually do a roadway inversion so that the center of the road is lowered rather than elevated to allow the floodwater to stay in the center of the road, find its way to an infiltration swale. Again, that takes some modeling, takes some engineering judgment to determine if that's appropriate versus elevating the roadway, but it's an important part of the toolkit. Moving to the neighborhood level improvements, these are things that could be undertaken at a district level, potentially requiring cooperation between the city, homeowner associations, and other stakeholder parties. They involve things like green infrastructure and nature-based solutions, similar to the rain garden that you see in the photo here, continuing the city's efforts to upgrade stormwater infrastructure, working with private utility companies to upgrade their utilities as well, and potentially thinking about things like neighborhood resilience parks, which I'm going to talk a little bit more about. If a neighborhood or a group of owners could potentially find a small piece of property within a neighborhood to think about it from an open space and resilience perspective, it might provide an opportunity to do things like introduce pervious cover, some infiltration swales, open space and landscaping. It could be a spot for larger scale infrastructure like injection wells to get water down into the groundwater table, potentially opportunities for subsurface floodwater storage. And again, create a community amenity. It could include paths, kayak launch, overlooks on the canals, those types of things. There we go. The final scale and category of improvements in the toolbox are things that would be undertaken at the city level. These are larger scale, higher cost items. They would likely require city action and coordination with multiple stakeholders and regulatory agencies. They involve things like continuing the city's ongoing success with elevating the city seawall, potentially thinking about things like deploying a retractable surge barrier at the mouth of the New River to protect against extreme king tides and storm surge, and potentially looking for opportunities for land reclamation and wetland restoration. And the photo on the bottom right here, again, is an example from the project in Norfolk, Virginia, and it exemplifies the application of multiple tools. So in this photo, you can see a reconstructed oyster reef, living shoreline and wetland creation, an earthen berm to help protect the neighborhood, a stone revetment. We also elevated the road in the middle of this neighborhood and repaved it with pervious materials. So again, applying a range of solutions. It's not a one tool to solve the issue here. And it's that type of comprehensive approach that we see as most applicable to Fort Lauderdale. Thank you.
So Chris just talked about a number of adaptation tools that are oriented towards infrastructure, but there's also policy and programmatic tools that should be used in parallel. So an example of that is a housing mobility and land acquisition program. So what that looks like is to support those who do want to move elsewhere, the opportunity to do so. Right now, we think it's best if the city starts to create the foundation of that program, supporting and really enabling the city to be better prepared should future flood events happen. We believe, when the market does account for flood risks in the future, households may be more inclined to participate, and the city will be better prepared to acquire land. So an example of this is in Charlotte-Mecklenburg County. They have a program like this that they use in concert with accurate flood risk projections and land use and zoning code that discourages development in areas of high risk. On that topic, another tool that can be used is land use and zoning code standards. So we recommend that the city does update code to promote pervious cover and really encourage development in areas with less risk. In addition, the code could be updated to prevent adjustments and variances that limit harmonization options. So an example of this is in New York City, we have resiliency design guidelines, and that is both specific to a building, but also any kind of broader investment and improvement needs to adhere to these. There we go. So in addition to those two, there's a handful of other interventions on the programmatic and policy side that should be, again, considered in parallel. So I'll run down this list, and there's going to be a lot more that can be said about it, but in the interest of time, we'll keep it at a high level. So first is just ongoing maintenance and enforcement. So as both individual property owners, HOAs, the city, the county make investments in infrastructure, it's not a one-time investment. It needs to be ongoing maintained. Second is standing up a loan program. So for individuals that can't make the investment to elevate their home, a loan program can support them to do this or make other kind of resilient interventions to their property. Again, really important to orient towards accurate flood risk projections for all types of flood risk. We'll talk a little bit later about education outreach and how important that is. And you can see on the right, this picture depicts a public event that orients people to climate science, but also what really the lived experience will be going forward in dealing with these risks. Another option to consider is we know that insurance here has gone up significantly, and that is a burden to individuals and households. And one way for that to be to think about kind of how to decrease premiums is to pursue a group purchase, either at the community level or citywide level, which can share kind of the burden, but also ideally decrease premiums. In addition, I know there's kind of individual property level flooding disclosures, but as Jim mentioned, there lacks kind of a disclosure around street flooding. So at the time of sale or if a permit is pulled, there could be a required street flooding disclosure as well. And then lastly, and this is related to education outreach, is ensuring, the city already does this, but ensuring that there's timely flood warning systems in place. Now I'll pass it to Allison.
Thanks, everyone. I'm Allison Anderson. I'm an architect from Unabridged Architecture in Bay St. Louis, Mississippi. So we're on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. We have our own resilience challenges. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the road of choice, which is if, after exhausting all other possibilities, you determine road elevation is a potential solution, what are the principles that should guide any road selection and prioritization? So this was what we all agreed on. Public safety is the top priority. Again, the number of people at risk is critical, and maintaining those emergency routes and critical connections to these essential facilities is really important. To accompany road elevation, stormwater improvements are essential. They're a really integral part of understanding how we raise roads and how we maintain drainage to keep those roadways dry and ensure regulatory compliance. We can't just keep taking things over the seawall. We have to improve the environment and provide some aesthetic benefits if possible. And then obviously, I don't have to tell you this, utilities are important to us. They provide continuity of service, water, sewer, power. We have to make sure that those are protected. So we went through the city, and I know the city has over 500 miles of roadway. They have roadways in different classifications and types. We divided it into 3 categories. These are the critical roadways, which are high priority. These are evacuation routes, critical corridors, which provide egress away from, high-risk areas or imminent threats like hurricanes. They provide access to critical facilities like hospitals and fire and police stations, and they have to remain accessible for post-flooding access. Collector streets are those commercial corridors and commuter streets that connect multiple neighborhoods. They support essential economic development activities, and these are kind of moderate priority for road elevation if the road is at risk. And then, of course, we have local community roadways as well, those roadways that serve you all in your neighborhoods and provide access to residential properties. So the criteria, with those over 500 miles of roadways, the city needs to assess and inventory all the roadways, but they need a really quick way to determine whether or not these roads are eligible for road elevation. And so the first 2 criteria for road elevation are of the greatest importance. And the first one is the roadway critical? Is it an evacuation route? Does it serve essential public facilities? Again, we're just beating down on the fact that public safety and health and welfare are primary importance. That's important to all of us in hazard events as well as everyday emergencies. And then, is the road within the 100-year floodplain? Because these areas are more susceptible to higher flooding now and in the future. So they can go through those first two sort of criteria and quickly assess and determine whether or not to continue inventorying that road and considering it for elevation. So we have 8 additional criteria for road elevation. So the first one is, have adjacent buildings been damaged by flooding? This is a good predictor of whether flood damage will continue or accelerate if no action is taken, of course. Does the road experience frequent or intense flooding from king tides? These locations have a history of flooding. They're likely points of future inundation. Are bridges along the roadway below the 100-year floodplain? I think the city has 53 bridges or something like that. Many bridges are old, they're low, they're compromised by other sort of structural issues. They should be included in the consideration of which roads to elevate. And then, of course, going back to the toolbox that Hannah and Chris described, have other flood solutions been installed? Because, again, this is kind of the solution of last resort. If those other solutions have not addressed flooding intensity, we should consider putting them in first. If they have addressed flooding intensity, maybe road elevation is not a priority anymore. Additional criteria include, are a high number of people served by the roadway? There are lots of ways to break this down, but we felt that the more people living, working, or using a roadway indicates these are higher priority for elevation. Does the roadway serve a disadvantaged community? Because we understand that vulnerable populations have fewer resources to address this temporary displacements, interruptions to workflow, or the ability to work remotely. So that becomes a really big consideration. Do the majority of adjacent property owners support that road elevation? That's always important to get that neighborhood buy-in, because local acceptance is essential in these circumstances. And so they may also be able to contribute to funding these solutions. And then we looked at whether or not the road elevation project can catalyze associated benefits. They might be able to leverage some funding that provides bike lanes or beautification or sidewalks or other benefits to residents. Oh, whoa, I did not do that. I am so sorry. You just got the preview. I guess I am out of time. We're going to go back here, way back here. Sorry about that, guys. Oh, yeah, really. All this stuff. Look at what you've got to look forward to. Okay. So, oops, here we go. So as we apply those 10 criteria, critical roadways have a higher weight, right? And the high importance criteria have a higher weight. So we're going to go through this chart. Green means good, right? Green means go. Yellow means partial alignment, and red means that the particular roadway has limited alignment with that criteria. So here's an example. It's getting, okay, we got it. So the first 2 criteria are the ones on the top there. They're sort of the quick assessment. If they don't pass that assessment, then maybe you don't need to go forward. But here are those 10 criteria, and we just decided to give you an example of how this may lay out. Now, the city is going to add some specificity to these criteria. They're going to assign point values. They're going to determine that eligibility. But they can use this type of tool to compare different roadway types. And note that these criteria do not preclude a local road from rising to the top, from being eligible for roadway funding. So they can go through these criteria. They can say, okay, roadway A really becomes important. Sorry, I'm trying to go forward. So they're going to prioritize these projects to some sort of short list, right? Which allows comparisons. And depending on their capacity, they'll be able to fund and administer a number of these projects concurrently based on that threshold. So in this case, you might establish a threshold of 70 points whatever those points, however those points are scored, and that everything above that 70-point threshold would be considered for roadway funding. So that would be Project A being a critical roadway, Project C being a collector street, which serves a high number of residents and has the potential to create accessory benefits. And then Project D could include a local street that has already tried multiple solutions to reduce flooding, but it still experiences frequent or intense flooding, where the residents support that roadway elevation and the project can catalyze other improvements. I want to note that even after elevation, roadways may continue to experience flooding based on the base flood elevation and the 1% chance of flooding in any year, because many of these roadways are in those areas. I'm going to pass it to Byron.
Thanks, Allison. Good morning. I'm Byron Stiggy from Level Infrastructure in New York. I'm a civil engineer. My practice studies flood risk and flood mitigation and protection. We design roads and utilities. I'm going to discuss our recommendations for those roadways that did meet the threshold, that are the high priority roadways selected for elevation, potential elevation. But first I want to put the process in a little more context. You heard from Hannah and Chris about all those preparations, all those toolbox ideas, strategies that the city can do to prepare. And you heard Allison discuss a prioritization and criteria framework. I'm going to discuss the next step, which is really scoping and a feasibility of a particular road segment to see if it really does meet the feasibility. And if it doesn't meet the feasibility, you can go back and continue to prepare. If it doesn't meet the high priority threshold, you can go back and continue to prepare. This is an iterative process, so it's not a one-time criteria and process. And then, of course, we'll discuss funding and implementation. The first step is really scoping a project, and it can be a short document to get all stakeholders all aligned. Sometimes the larger the project, the shorter the scope document. You really want to define your goals, write them down on a piece of paper, and get everyone to agree on them. You need to. Some goals are emergency access, or reducing flood risk, or minimizing impact on other surrounding properties. So when you write those things down, everyone kind of realizes what exactly we're doing here. Of course, scoping often defines boundaries, limits of construction work, or limits of adjacent properties, or sometimes it's more broad and defining who's involved. Not always, but sometimes scoping includes the basis of design, getting the design criteria, codes, standards, sustainability considerations. It can be as long or as short as you want it to be, but it really helps to get everyone to agree on that. The next stage is really a feasibility study. Oftentimes you write an RFP, get consultants to really dive in a little bit more detail. The components are a bit of a concept design, a stakeholder engagement, really studying that harmonization issues. A good feasibility study always comes out with a budget and probably a cost-benefit analysis, but not always. And then starting to think about those funding and implementation strategies at a high level. You asked us to think about how high to raise the roads. And there's no one answer, of course, to that, but we're giving some general guidance from our experience. Those critical roadways, you really want those to be up above the FEMA 100-year base flood elevation. Typically, the design criteria would be BFE +1. So in an emergency storm event, those roads are still passable. Collector roads, maybe a different criteria, thinking more about king tides and longer-term sea level rise, and maybe a heavier, longer-term storm event. These criteria can change, but the concept is you want to reduce damage to businesses and homes during rain events at high tide. That's a kind of design concept, and the numbers will work themselves out. It might be around the base flood elevation. Those local roads, those residential roads, are a little different. It seems that they are more guided in elevating closer to those surrounding properties. You want to keep the roads lower than home finish floors. Many finished floors have been elevated along the aisles, and so they were required to elevate to base flood elevation +1, and whatever that was back when they raised or in the future. So that will really set how high to raise those roads, and it will be around BFE -1. But you want to make sure that stormwater is working and you're not considering stormwater as well on that. In terms of stormwater in specific, if you're elevating roads, it really is important to rethink the stormwater management strategy. There's oversized pipes are a real opportunity in a place like Fort Lauderdale with really heavy rain events. It provides some storage, like a really long tank. It actually provides future capacity for heavier rain events. So a little space for growth in the future. And maybe it'll reduce some fill a bit. As mentioned, injection wells are a common technique here in Fort Lauderdale, and not in residential areas, but maybe it could be. Maybe the collectors bring to us the resilience park, and there's an injection well, and reducing pumping and inject into the neighboring waterways. And of course, integrating nature-based solutions with trees and swales wherever possible. In terms of engaging stakeholders, obviously private utilities, the electrical, communications, gas, to us this seems like an opportunity for them to improve their maybe utilities that are end of useful life, have been deteriorated by saltwater, if their capital plans allow. It doesn't seem like it will always be necessary to raise those dry utilities, but a chance should be offered at a lower cost for them. Public utilities most likely to need to replace drinking water, stormwater, and sanitary sewers to get a nice modern utilities in those roads. And of course, a major stakeholder, of course, getting those residents and impacted neighbors on board with the project, making sure everyone is aligned and in agreement. So we started thinking about harmonization. These are the typical condition where the road is at one, 2, or 3, typically right now in those aisles. Older bungalows are lower, maybe elevation 3 or 4. There's seawalls over at 3, and you used to just have to worry about king tide. But as things went along, the homes are being rebuilt at those elevated levels, but the road is still low, the seawall's coming up. So when you start thinking about raising the road, you start to see a more, this is not a very challenging harmonization condition. You sort of set that road a foot or 2 below the homes, put in that new storm sewer. The landscape improvements probably should be or could be improved by those homeowners. They're getting those benefits directly. The challenge really is when you come to the condition where the road is raising, but the home is still low. And where we really worked as a panel to try to think through this, and we really do think there are solutions here. Every parcel, every road will be different, but we really like this idea of inverting roadways, making sure that road is not crowned and flowing onto those properties, but crowned inward into a catch basin in the middle. You could have a sump pump or an injection pump and some more green swales. There's strategies to work through that harmonization. It's challenging for sure. A feasibility study needs to really lay out in probably different groups of funding sources. The road paving and the private utilities are separate, public utilities separate funding sources, and those harmonizations might be different funding sources as well. And then finally, as we'll get into next, touching on feasibility and implementation. So should that road section be elevated if it's feasible? You got to buy-in from private and public utilities and stakeholders. Everyone's aligned. Implementation seems possible. Let's go ahead and start funding those solutions. On to Malika.
Thank you, Byron. Good morning, everybody. My name is Malika Rivers. I'm based in Atlanta, Georgia. I'm a consultant, and I work with commercial real estate owners and developers and operators, and governments work together to plan, design, deliver infrastructure through cost-sharing strategies and public-private partnerships. So I'm going to frame the conversation for you, and it's really important to really have these big three takeaways when you're talking about attracting public funding or private funding for that matter. The first point is that you need to create a compelling message. You need to sell the issue at hand. That compelling message indicates the need that you are trying to solve. Key point number two is to really lean into your partners, develop the strategic partnerships that you need in order to align with your priorities and to leverage your funds. Many times if you put $1 in the table, another person will put $1 in the table or $2 on the table. So those strategic partnerships are very critical. Key point number three is to stick with it. This is public process, it's regulatory. It is not a sprint, it is a marathon. So be committed to the process and you will see some results. I want to dig in a little bit further on that first issue, which is the lean into the issue and create your message. And as we see it, your problem statement, which again is your message, is that the city and the region, excuse me, the region being really critical in this endeavor, you're all at a tipping point with flood risk. And what is interesting is that you're a coastal community, but you're not the only coastal community around the country that's dealing with this. But there are going to be many other coastal communities that will deal with this. So you really have a degree of impact that's requiring significant resources to meet this challenge. So I would lean into that message because that's what your problem statement is. But that problem also translates into an opportunity, especially if you gather your partners around you. This is not just a city issue, this is a regional issue, and when I say region, there are multiple partners in this. On the public sector side, the government side, we heard from utilities, private sector, that could be businesses, residents, and so forth. So lean into this effort together and align with your priorities to develop this plan. So this is an illustration of just a smidgen of some of the funding that's out there. There are thousands of funding programs at different levels of government, from the local, state, to federal side. So these are just samples of some of the programs out there. Some of them you're already tapping into, and perhaps others are opportunities for you. And on the local side, that includes special assessments, real estate transfer tax, incentive programs and rebates. This is a destination and tourist community. Tapping into those a little bit deeper could maximize some local dollars. On the state side, Florida Department of Transportation has locally administered grant programs. Florida EPD and Florida Water Management all have grant as well as technical assistance. And technical assistance is also offered at the federal level. So if there's a capacity issue, an experience issue, there are opportunities to tap into technical assistance. At the federal level, many agencies offer grants as well as loan programs. The United States Department of Transportation offers discretionary grant programs that are available through the recently passed spending bills, that specifically being the bipartisan infrastructure law, which has a lot of programs for this type of issue. The Inflation Reduction Act also has a variety of programs to tap into. Housing and Urban Development, US EPA, all offer them. So it's overwhelming how many programs there are, which goes back to my point about being very strategic about what you want to go after. The next type of funding source was really to leverage the public-private partnerships because those can bring local dollars to the table. In Florida, you've got 30 statutes that allow for special purpose districts. And a quick search shows that you have about 1,900 special purpose districts in the state of Florida. They're all sourcing funds as well as investing in infrastructure or other top priorities in their local communities. A couple of them are listed here. Stewardship districts, business improvement districts. Some of these special purpose districts are initiated by the government. Some of them are initiated by the private sector, the property owners, be that businesses or commercial real estate or even residents. But they allow for an ecosystem where it's not just about one project that can be identified, but a series of projects because it provides some organizational structure. Tax increment financing, or in other states they call it tax allocation districts, also opportunities to channel funds into specific geographies. And of course, public authorities can do that as well. So here's a quick example of how to strategically position for funds. In this case, it's about some of the federal discretionary programs that I talked about earlier. They're highly competitive. But the money is there. There's trillions of dollars out there, and it's going to communities that are planning and strategic and committed. So the first step is back to the scope. Understand what your projects are, understand where they are in the delivery of them. The specific recommendation here is to bundle up your projects, because when you're chasing after federal funding, it has to have impact, and usually on a citywide or a regional scale. Gather your data. Data-driven information is what the feds are after. That could be economic data, cost-benefit data, socioeconomic, workforce. There's a whole host of things, and the federal government has a website where you could generally just get a checklist of all of the things that they are looking for. Build the coalitions. Again, I cannot stress this one enough. Multi-jurisdictional efforts are the ones that get awarded these types of funds. So on the government side, the city, the county, the region, bring your private sector folks into it, your businesses, your chambers of commerce, your nonprofit folks, other types of associations. Identify your capital stack. Federal funding usually requires a match, and that can be upwards of 20%. 20% can be a big amount if you're going after a 10 or a 20 or a $50 million project. So lean into your partners and on the messaging that you're all in this together. And again, tell that story. What is it that is the but for of your argument? You know, but for these federal funds, we will not be able to put this regional system in place, which could set a standard and be scalable to other coastal communities around the country. So this is a bit of a game plan, and it can be transferable not only to the federal level, but down to the local level as well. So with that, I will pass it off to my colleague, Charnel. I think that they are clicking for you.
Good morning. I'm Charnel Hicks, president of CH Planning. We're an urban planning firm based between Philadelphia and the District of Columbia. We specialize in transportation and infrastructure planning as well as policy and engagement. So we're going to just get started. Roadways are integral to flood management, and the roadway elevation is just one of the ways that we can use our transportation systems for to enhance flood resilience. Our transportation system represents a significant long-term investment. It houses our utilities. It's the way we get the places we need to go, and every member of the community interacts with the transportation system just about every day. So I think it's interesting and exciting that you guys have taken on this project to look at a new way to use your transportation system for flood management. Managing flooding is worth it. You have to do it. And I think that this might be, as some of my colleagues on the panel have said, this might be the most important thing that you have to do. Health and safety is important, right? Is the most important function of government. And it makes sense that this is where one of the areas that you're focusing your efforts. It also respects, besides life and safety, it respects the way that we provide government services, that we connect with each other, and it provides an opportunity to protect the things that are important to us in terms of our history, culture, the special place that we have here, and our community values. So an important undertaking, lots of ways to go about it, and it's something that could be, again, the most important thing you do. We put together a quick example of what a flood resilience policy might be, the exact words and exactly what it might say. As an example, those words aren't so important. The important thing is that when done right, a flood resilience policy is something that everyone in the community gets behind, that the governing body can adopt, and that is how decisions are made in government. And it's the policy is something that that speaks to community priorities. There should be a lot of involvement in adopting and creating it, and it can guide how investments are made going forward. So a policy informs city actions and can help the governing body direct where resources go, what plans and actions are taken, and every part of government has a role to play. So while Public Works has a big role, the planning department, Parks and Recreation, Code Enforcement, Police and Fire can all contribute, and with a unified message, everyone can pull together and resources can be focused and directed into implementing some of the things you've heard today and some of the things you're doing already. A policy also informs other partners so that everyone in the community can understand what the goals are and what the community wants to achieve, so that folks can play their part. For example, the school district, which is not an agency of local government, but they're the ones who are going to be training the next generations of engineers who may be tackling these problems. And they're, quite frankly, the ones who will be living with, hopefully, the great solutions that you put in place today. The developers will not be governed by this policy, but if they know what the policy is and they know the direction the community needs to go, they're more likely and more able to participate in creating a more flood resilient future here. So some things that the governing body can do with a policy is provide guidance, as I said before. It can help and direct and allocate funds. So when a decision's made, there's not a question of why did this money go here, why did that money go there. It makes it clear that flood resilience is one of the most important things that we do in this community, and we're going to direct funds to address this very important issue. Planning activities with community plans, some of the neighborhood plans and the comprehensive plans can also support this unifying policy. And then it can also be used to direct planning for specific programs like roadway elevation and other things like creating new task force, maybe an intergovernmental task force that meets on this issue regularly, or another body like perhaps I've worked with a stormwater management authority that's somewhat independent but is responsible for raising funds and directing and managing the stormwater management program. So there are examples of how having a unifying policy can inspire ideas from other areas of government. So one of the things that we saw is one of the things that we know is that there are some roadways in the community that experience regular flooding. Some of those areas have boat access. So there could be opportunities for city agencies to come up with creative ways to help tackle some of the problems that we're having, some of the challenges we're addressing, and to bring resources, funding, but most importantly, ideas to the fore in tackling the challenges that flooding presents. So again, government, it's not on its own. Nonprofit and philanthropic partners can also play a part. Many of us are familiar with the organization Habitat for Humanity. There's a Broward County chapter. The organization has a disaster resilient building program, both for building homes, new homes for families, but also for retrofitting and rehabilitating homes. And that could be a resource for roadway harmonizing for some properties, not as a standalone measure, but part of a larger program, part of an ongoing and planned project. And if these partners understand your priorities and your goals, they can come and join with you in making those things happen. Communication and engagement is so important, and it's so nice to see so many of you here, and it's really great to see the work that that the city is doing and the infrastructure you have for engaging the community on a regular basis around topics that are important to everyone. The most important, or I should say, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and say the most important thing in community engagement is having transparency that promotes good government, right? Sunshine cures a lot of ailments and allows folks to really participate, share ideas, and know what to expect so that there are fewer surprises. Transparency can also help in explaining the rationale for why decisions are made. So rather than wondering, why did this investment happen here or happen there, transparency in government allows that to happen. Or when is my issue going to be addressed? By having these meetings, by communicating the importance of this issue, it really helps everybody to get on board, know what's expected, and know how they can participate. So everyone has a role, everyone has a voice. Flooding affects everyone. So new ideas and points of view should always be welcome, and I think it's fantastic that in this case we're talking about one idea. I know that there are many others that that the city is considering and has put into play based on feedback from the community. Every life, every home, and every visitor experience is important. And with more voices, we get more input, and our policies and our implementation program can be that much better. Advocacy is important for accountability. Sometimes, sometimes it can be a little loud. Sometimes it's not sometimes it's not delivered exactly the way we might want it to, but it's still important that we get it in, because only with ideas can we have innovation. Only with ideas can we have these solutions. It's fantastic that we're looking at the future. This infrastructure that we're talking about today has a 50-year design life. So we're talking today about something that will still be here almost, I guess in the future it'll be half a lifetime away. And it's the children, our next generation, that will be living with this infrastructure. They'll also be living with flying cars and technology that will tell you that there may be a flood in a month and a half. And we should think about that as we make these plans. So embrace these opportunities to address this very important issue. We're happy to have been able to play a part. And Jim, you're going to take us home.
Thank you, Charnel. very uplifting kind of call to action in the end there. Well, thank you for your time this morning. I know that was a lot of information. You can see what we did with our spring break in 3 days. So we're going to try and distill it down and leave you with a couple of things that we think are key next steps, so it's not all overwhelming. One of the things to know is this process doesn't just end with the slideshow. There's actually a written document report that gets put together by the great staff at the Urban Land Institute, and that'll be provided to the sponsor. So a lot of the content which may have gone over your head or just seemed like too much to take in at this point in the morning will be available for review and reading, as well as I think the slideshow and the presentation. But again, to kind of a little cap some things off, some of the things that we think you could get started on right away and really want to underscore before we leave is the assignment was about elevating roads. Allison and Byron presented, I think, some really interesting ways to think about how you make those decisions. So that was our take in 3 days. So the next step really is for the city and primarily Public Works to look at that criteria, develop a process and a timeline to make it your own, put in your own voice, put in your own values, but use that framework hopefully to develop your rubric by how you're going to decide which roads get elevated when. The second is the things that Charnel talked about, the really importance of creating a policy and raising that up to a top priority, and how that fits into the work that Chris and Hannah talked about, creating that umbrella policy and then exploring all of those other elements. The third is to look at the recommendations that were made around other tools. Again, roads are not they're kind of maybe the option of last resort. What are the other things that we talked about today that piqued your curiosity that really deserve a much deeper look and attention from across many departments, not just Public Works? The county's underway in a resilience plan, and they're probably doing a lot of front-end work that's worth borrowing from, looking at, and more importantly, because resilience doesn't have political boundaries, how do you integrate your actions with theirs? How do you build on the momentum that they're creating? The work that Mylika talked about in terms of funding, you need to identify what are all the resources in terms of staff and partners that can go out on that long marathon to raise money. So who are you going to assemble? How are you going to coordinate them? And how are you going to make the sum greater than the parts? And then finally, you're doing a lot of good work. There's a lot of really interesting things going on, and I think what we heard during our listening sessions is a lot of people don't know about it. So pat yourself on the back, get the word out there, let people know what's going on, inventory, integrate, and communicate all the efforts so people understand what is happening. And as you move to these next levels of embracing resilience on a broader strategy, make sure that that word is getting out as well. So with that, I think we are done. Thank you. Oh, yes. Thank you. And I think if people have the stamina for a marathon, we have time for some questions and answers.
So if you have questions, please come up to the podium, state your name and your neighborhood or business affiliation.
Don't be shy. Actually, it's not a question as much as I just wanted to, again, say thank you. I do have a question. Is this all you've done since Monday? Just joking. I so appreciate what I have heard today. I will let you know the City Commission meets on Tuesday. I will be discussing this as part of my commission reports and just making sure that the commission understands how important that we keep digging in, keep going, keep working. I will so look forward to the written report. I know that I'm pleased to hear that we perhaps have that shelf life of 50 years. Someone's going to have to let me know how that goes in 50 years. I'm not quite sure I'll be able to hang around till the very end. But again, so important, so vital to our future. And I really just wanted to say how much the City Commission appreciates you. Again, just tremendous work, and we'll look forward to continuing to advocate on behalf. As I mentioned on Monday, this is a goal that we set every year as a commission. It is a priority, and I do so agree. What could be more important to the life and safety of our residents? So thank you so much, and thank you to everyone for participating and for being a part of this. Yes, I'm glad to see there is a question. That's great. So again, just say thank you. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tricia Halliday. It's not so much a question as a comment, and I want to thank you all. I did view the video that was online, and you guys are very, very good. I enjoyed seeing some of the people that spoke, and I very much enjoyed today as well. You did a wonderful, wonderful job, and I'm glad you mentioned about the county, the Broward County, because I've been going and viewing it's the Water Advisory Board TAC meeting. They do a wonderful job and Senator Geller does it, and Dr. Jennifer Gerard does it. And I really do think that people should be viewing those as well. They've been working on it for years about our water conditions here. So they're on video as well, on Vimeo, I believe. So I appreciate everything you're doing. I'm glad that it's out there. We really need to take a good hard look about what's going on. Thank you.
Switch it around. So my name is Dr. Nancy Gassman. I'm the Assistant Public Works Director, and we've been working very closely with this panel over the course of the last several months. The panel's been doing their work over the last several days. I, too, want to thank you on behalf of the city for all the work that you've done. And even though it's amazing what you've accomplished in the short time that you were here. So appreciate everything. We want to thank everyone who has come to listen and to contribute to this effort. And we're now in that place where we're going to be looking at the next steps, looking at the report, looking at this presentation, working with the commission to schedule some time to have a more thorough discussion with them regarding these issues and trying to move forward with the next steps. Thank you all for being here today. This presentation has been broadcast. It's available, recorded on the city's YouTube channel. And we'll also be posting the additional materials, the slideshow, and eventually the report on a dedicated webpage on the city's webpage under road elevation. Thank you again for being here. And with that, we would like you to take just a moment to appreciate what the panel has accomplished on our behalf. And with that, we are adjourned.